Driving examiners of Reddit. What's the worst way a student failed their driving test? A friend failed when I called them during the test. He answered the phone and told me he can't speak because he's in the middle of a driving test. My driving instructor said he had to fail someone because they executed a left turn into oncoming traffic. The student totaled the car. I had no choice but to fail him. No crap. My ex-wife failed her test on a route that we trained on by running a stop sign, then claiming she never saw it. I don't know how she didn't see it, with the flashing red lights and all, but I'm glad she never got her license. I don't think she has it still. I have a reverse story about how a driving examiner failed at examining my test. We had to drive on the Interstate for a certain period of time to show the instructor we were comfortable with fast moving traffic. So I pull onto the interstate and everything is going well. My eyes are on the road, 10 and 2, in the freaking zone, not looking anywhere but on the road and my mirrors. Feels like I have been driving for hours. Finally I look over and my instructor is dead asleep. I'm close to 2 hours from where I started and I nudge the instructor. She wakes up, freaks the frick out and tells me to pull off the next exit. She gets behind the wheel and drives us back. Politely asks me to not mention what happened to anyone. I passed. My uncle has a great driving test story. For part of his test, the instructor had him drive on the highway for a little while. Everything was going fine until, up ahead, his was closed for construction. Now, he should have slowed down, but he was inexperienced and sped up to pass the car in the next lane but didn't really have enough space. The instructor sees traffic cones and constructing workers ahead, so he starts slamming on the instructor brake on the passenger side. My uncle notices the car lurch from the brake, but he'd just passed the other car and wants to change lanes. So, he floors the gas to make up for the instructor's braking. At this point, he'd already starting running over the safety cones, and they're flying up behind the car as he speeds over them. Finally, just as the construction workers are getting ready to dive away from his cone-flinging death machine, he manages to change lanes. All the while, fighting the braking of the instructor by flooring the gas. He failed the test. Not a driving examiner, but a stage check instructor at a flight school. So similar idea. One girl came in as a private pilot and wanted to continue her training. I flew with her a few times to get her used to our airplanes, etc. As a bit of a recheck to see where she was at. She was more hazardous than a new student in their first week of training. She got halfway to takeoff speed on a taxiway, and when I took over and slowed us down she asked why we were going so fast. She had the throttle set to nearly full with no brakes. Same thing climbing out of the airport. I told her to level off at an altitude, and she set full power and pointed the airplane up, so we kept climbing. 500 feet too high, 1000 feet too high. I finally had to take over so we didn't enter airspace we weren't cleared into. Her response was similar. Wanted to know why we kept climbing. Tried steep turns with her. They're supposed to be a 360-degree turn while maintaining altitude. I recorded our flight track, and it looks more like the drop at the top of a roller coaster when we started the turn. After losing about 1,500 feet in a few seconds and accelerating rapidly towards the ground, she took her hands off the uke and told me I had controls. Had to stop her from entering active runways people were landing on that we didn't have clearance for multiple times. She owns her own airplane and is legal to fly it. Scary thought. She ended up leaving the school once she figured out she wasn't up to our standards, let alone those of her private pilot certificate. Skyhawk 345 Foxtrot, state your intentions. Glendale Tower 345 Foxtrot, with information unicorn is planning on finishing college and finding a nice girl. Not an examiner, but the first time I took my driving test, I exited the DMV parking lot onto the wrong side of the road. Whoops. Dude, when I turned out of the DMV parking lot I dropped one wheel off the curb. Auto fail. Worst part, they made me finish the test. So brutal. My old instructor told me his best story. Student did really well on the test. Pulled over and parked at the side of the road at the end of the test because the car park was full. Examiner fills in the paperwork that says he's passed. Hands it to the student. Student is really happy. Thanks the examiner. Opens the car door. Doesn't look. And a passing van takes the car door off. pass retracted instantly and the student owed the instructor a new car door. Imagine what a pisser it is to fail with the pass certificate still in your hand. I sure wish the DMVs around here had loaner cars to take tests in. Friend of mine was honked at while he took his driving test. He didn't do anything bad, the dude just honked the second the light turned green. Apparently being honked at was an automatic fail. Here you have to display a decal on the back if you are a learner or probationary driver. People harassing them constantly became such an issue that police would put the decals on unmarked cars to catch them. My mother drove the driver's ed car off a bridge into a creek in 10th grade. Still passed. I failed my test 3 years ago when I moved to a new state and had to take the road test because I was using my girlfriend's car, which was a Mini Cooper with a really tight turn radius and weird acceleration. I had never driven it before, so it was a bad choice for parallel parking. It was extremely embarrassing to pull back into the BMV to tell her I failed so she would be driving 4-hour dates for a few weeks. I have a friend that failed his first driving test because he completed a left turn when the light turned yellow. The test administrator claimed he was running a red light and told him he should have reversed back to the original position. Another friend failed the driving test 3 or 4 times for various reasons. On the 4th or 5th try, she finally passed the driving test, and we are all fairly certain it was a pity pass. She is 25 now and still an unbelievably god-awful driver. My 92-year-old grandmother, who has always been an awful driver, performed so poorly on her driving test in the 1940s. The test administrator gave her her license on the condition that she agreed to only drive to and from work. My mom and uncle frequently joke that she would have had her license revoked if she had ever had to retake the driving test. I'm like 100% sure that reversing into the original position is 100% more dangerous than what he did. My ex failed her driver's test because of her grandfather's death. She had gone a few months without a license, but when her grandfather passed away, her grandmother couldn't be trusted to drive herself around safely. The driving instructor was a born-again Christian. He got into a conversation about her accepting Jesus and her family accepting. This rolled into him telling her that her grandfather went to heck for not accepting Jesus before he passed. She started bawling uncontrollably. On the highway, he made her pull off an exit and she ran his mid-90s Nissan Maxima over a curb and down into a small ditch. Needless to say, she didn't get her license, and he was banned from talking about Jesus while teaching kids to drive. He was a teacher at our high school and the class was through the HS. He deserved to have his stupid Nissan driven into a ditch. You do not tell a grieving family member that their dead relative is in heck. I would punch someone for doing that and feel no remorse. I failed my first test because I kept landing on the wrong side of the street every time I turned with the excuse of there's no cars. How am I supposed to know which lane is mine? And because I didn't do any full stops because nobody actually does that. Landing on the wrong side of the street, there's your problem. Cars should never be airborne. I was the observer student for this girl. She didn't know how to put the car in gear, would pump the brakes hard to stop, didn't know that you had to turn the wheel when you reversed as part of a 3-point turn, and would speed during the test. I don't know how she passed. The first 2 aren't actually graded where I live. The third part would be a fail on that specific part of the test, and the 4th would be an outright fail. Not an examiner. I was a student. After we passed our tests, we drove to a parking lot to wait for them to print and bring us our temp licenses. I get mine. The guy in a white pickup next to me gets mine. The girl in a blue sedan gets hers. I pull out and pass both of them to the exit part of the lot. The guy in the white pickup backs up and turns into the blue sedan. I saw it happen in slow motion. I was failed the first time I took my test because I forgot to use my turn signal when parallel parking. My friend took the test and was 1/4 of an inch off when parallel parking. The instructor measured it with a ruler. That's just the instructor being a dong. I just failed 3 days ago. I parallel parked, everything was good, put that car in drive and went. I guess I forgot the e-brake was on, but now I know the e-brake doesn't work. The emergency brake is also known as the make the car smell funny lever. I played an evil prank on my sister during her driving test. I was put out at her so right before she came to take the car for her driving test, I had my friends hog tie me and I hid in the trunk. waited until her test was well underway, and started thumping on the trunk and screaming. Finally, after 15 minutes of writhing and starting to get pretty sweaty, seriously considering kicking out a headlight, the driving examiner made her open the trunk, where she found a sweaty teenage girl gagged and hog-tied in the back, pretending to be terrified. What did my sister do? Deny it? Explain it? Scream? Number? She took one look and said, "Ugh, it's just my sister," shut the trunk, and actually tried to get back in the car and finish her test. That sure was a tricky one for our mother to explain to the police. TLDR. I faked my own kidnapping during my sister's road test and examiner called the police. This sounds like something from Malcolm in the Middle, where you do the driving test near my place. As you leave the driveway, there used to be a stop sign. It was in view, but not clearly. It has been taken away in the last few years, but standard practice here is when you fail the test driver asks you immediately to drive back to the building and you fail instantly. My friend went for the test. She was adamant she was going to pass. She forgets about the stop sign and fails the test within 20 seconds. Sounds like where I got my license. My son failed his first attempt in my old Prius because the electronic start-stop ignition failed to come on. Just beeped and shut down again. He pressed a couple more times, and it did the same thing. Insta-fail. Naturally, the car started up immediately after the examiner told him that. Too late. And it never did that again, either, just to make it worse. Oh god, there's this little piece of crap who's been failing my tests for years. I can't even count how many times he's put my life in danger. Even worse than that, I think his 80 or so year old boss has a thing for me. Every time I go around him he starts babbling about how successful his crappy fast food place is. And top it all off, I'm a freaking pufferfish. Not a teacher but a guy in my driver ed class jumped the curb hard and knocked out the transmission within 10 minutes of getting in the car. My friend spent a year in Paris to learn French. When she returned to London, she sat a driving test. Just as she started, the instructor asked her to pull over. Surprised, she found out she had failed the test. The instructor simply said, "In England, we drive on the left-hand side of the road." This was over 10 years ago. I still laugh at her. I'm always amused by the signs around over that desperately plead with foreign drivers to stay on the left. Over here, on busy days you sometimes share the car with other people who are scheduled to have a test that day. That is, one drives, examiner as passenger, the other in the back seat, then the first and last change positions when the first has either passed or failed. I was scheduled to be second, so I chilled in the back listening to music and mentally going over the lessons and not paying attention, when my head suddenly slammed into the back of the seat in front of me. Turns out the chick who was driving had gotten so nervous to have me watch, although I really didn't, music and wandering thoughts and all, that she panicked and sort of froze in anxiety while accelerating to 140 km/h on a 90 km/h freeway, unable to take her foot off the pedal. My head slamming into the seat was from the examiner literally kicking her foot off and slamming his set of brakes while swerving into a gas station parking lot. I got mine easily. All I had to do was driving us back to the start without killing anybody, lol. Oh, and my father told me an acquaintance of his failed 15 times, finally did it on the 16th. Immediately bought himself a Porsche 911. Died a week after in a horrible car crash because he ran a stop sign. Welp. We've got ourselves a Darwin Award winner. Not an instructor. I was actually the one who failed by doing this. Basically, I had been practicing for the driver's test with a different vehicle than the one I used to take it. Unfortunately for me, I had neglected to notice these cars had different ways of putting on the parking brake. And so when he asked me to take it off, I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to do so. Basically, the whole test ended in less than a minute, and I would forever have to live with this great shame brought upon me. My auntie did her test in a rural area. Some chickens had escaped from their pen and in a panic she hit the accelerator instead of the brake. One dead chicken. I'm not the examiner, but a girl in my class blew through a stop sign and rear-ended a police car. I think it took her 3 times to pass the test. Not an examiner, but I have a great story of this. When I was taking my driving test, the DMV, as usual, was packed and most people driving the course that day were learner drivers or testers. Now the route wasn't that hard. A few right turns, a few left turns, stop streets, traffic lights, the usual stuff. Anyway, I pull up to a red left turn arrow behind one other car at a dead stop. The car then heads into the intersection, gets halfway through and realizes they made an illegal left turn through a red light into oncoming traffic. Next thing I see is the car grinding into reverse and speeding back towards me. While this is happening, I put my hand on the gear shift just in case I needed to get out of this guy's way and mentally prepare myself for impact or to use the horn, but thankfully no need. It then stopped just short of crosswalk a few feet from my car, but still definitely blocking the cross traffic. Out jumps the DMV tester with her clipboard, and she just walks up the center divider back towards the DMV, just leaving this poor kid 2/3 in the intersection blocking the cross traffic. Anyway, the light turned green. The kid pulled his left turn, pulled up to the curb and got out, leaving his car idling as I drove past in the number 1 lane. The examiner in the seat next to laughing at the kid. Not driving examiner but person taking test. Must have closed my door too gently when I got in. Started the test and 100 meters down the road it opened about 10 centimeters while I was mid-gear change. I casually took my other hand off the wheel and slammed it shut. Still passed. As usual, not a driving instructor, but I know someone who actually managed to flip their car into a ditch while attempting to parallel park. Parallel parking. Car in a ditch. Upside down. I was talking to a guy once who failed his driving test because he hit a pedestrian. I think he was stopped at a light and he went when it turned green, but a pedestrian was still crossing the street. Not a driving examiner, but my driving instructor told me about this other student. They had a practice exam before her actual driving test and he pointed out the no left turn sign at an intersection. During the exam, she reaches the intersection again and tells the examiner that sign says that no left turns are allowed, then proceeds to left turn. Not a driving examiner. When I was 17, was walking towards my car at the testing center to begin my road test when I saw a girl fail without leaving the lot. She was pulling out of the parking spot. The car jerked forward 2-3 times. The examiner yelled at her to stop the car and he failed her immediately. Turned out she hadn't even turned off her handbrake before she started driving. Not a driving examiner. I failed mine because I ran a red light. I didn't know that you couldn't turn left on red. I was a dumbass. Fun fact, you can turn left on a red light if the road you are turning onto is a one-way street. My first attempt at my driving test went great. The last step was to parallel park, and I nailed it. I put the car into park automatic, and I looked at the evaluator with a smile on my face. He nodded toward me and told me I failed because I didn't apply the parking brake. I passed my driving test a few weeks later at a different site, during which I made several mistakes. Go figure. While taking my CDL Class A test a few years later, I get a female evaluator who could have bench pressed me. I waited and watched her fail the majority of the folks testing that morning. I capped off my perfect pre-trip with testing the horn, and the lanyard snapped. This was the first time I've observed any cheerful emotion out of this lady all day. There was a long wait. During the test, I exhibited some road rage while merging into an interstate. I beautifully navigated a turn from a single lane one way to a single lane one way. I can't believe they ask some of these idiots to do this with parked cars on either side. I failed to recall the clearance on a bridge I had just passed under, and I passed. Not an examiner, but I failed my driver's test the first time because when the test was completely over, the proctor told me to park in a space. I ended up parking too close to the car next to me, so that I had to slide out of the driver's door. My proctor called it an illegal maneuver and failed me. My driving instructor said I drove the best that day out of his students and failed. Still get a chuckle about that to this day. I failed my road test 3 times before I finally got my license on the 4th try. List of my mistakes include a pedestrian crossing in front of the car and me continuing full speed towards her, forgetting which way is left and which way is right and trying to go left on red, forgetting that I'm only allowed to turn left if there's a green arrow, not a green light, and driving us, with the instructor side facing traffic, into oncoming traffic. Specifically, a tractor trailer. It's okay guys, I'm licensed now. The fact that you're licensed now makes it so much less okay, lol. I'm a 17-year-old from Michigan. I failed my first test about a month ago because our parking section comes before the actual road test. I did the line test perfectly, pulling forward within a foot or so of a white line to prove you know where your front bumper is. But then I started having an anxiety attack cause the instructor couldn't tell me how I was doing. From the line test you have to back into a parking spot, which I did horribly on cause I forgot to straighten the wheel. From there was parallel parking, which I also did horribly on because I was looking in the wrong mirror. Every cone you hit is a point, and you can get 6 points off before you fail. I hit a lot of cones. My second test is tomorrow at 1:30. Let's hope anxiety doesn't fuck me over again. Good luck. I failed my first test miserably because of nerves, but when I did it the second time I knew what I was getting into and passed with flying colors. I don't know why I just remembered this, so I passed my test first try, but when I pulled back into the DMV parking lot, just as I finished pulling into the parking spot the car next to me started pulling out. For a second this made me feel like I was still going forward, so I braced as if we were going to hit the wall. The tester looked at me funny, but I had already passed. I was an examiner for 4 or 5 years. I have lots of stories. Here's a sampling. We were turning left at a large intersection controlled by traffic lights. This road is a 6-lane road that is divided in the middle. We had a green light and everything was fine. As she got about halfway through the turn, she looked up and saw the red light facing in the other direction. Panicked, turned back to the right, which now means we're driving down the wrong side of a huge road. Thankfully there was another intersection nearby that had a red light, so there were no cars coming. That gave us enough time to turn around and head straight back to the test center. She didn't a word to me after that, completely silent. I felt kind of bad because I think she was a decent driver that was just really nervous and freaked up badly. Another time, during winter, we were driving a little fast for the conditions. The roads weren't used much and were a little slick. We were approaching a 90-degree turn and she wasn't slowing down. On the outside of the turn was a deep ditch filled with icy water and muck. I distinctly remember debating with myself as to whether I should tell her to slow down, but the part of me that wanted to see what would happen won, so I kept my mouth shut. She started to make the turn, but the tires lost grip and we went into the ditch sideways and came to rest at probably a 45-degree angle. I had to climb out the driver's side and we both walked back to the building. Her dad had to call a tow truck to haul the car out. That story kind of makes me sound like a dong, but when you do that job it's almost like you're watching a movie sometimes. I've been in situations that were incredibly dangerous, but I've just watched unfold without even a rise in my heart rate. Afterwards I would think to myself, man, I really should have done something there. But at the time you're just this passive observer of whatever is going on. It's a bit surreal sometimes. Yet another story. We were parallel parking and the guy hit the accelerator instead of the brake and sent us up over the curb with the rear tire. When we stopped there was a loud hissing sound coming from that wheel, so I knew the tire had blown from the force of the impact. I said to the kid, "Okay, let's get out." He asked why, and I told him the tire had blown. He didn't believe me. He had to go out to check. Last one. We had hit the curb pretty hard during parallel parking a few minutes previous and were now turning left at an intersection. As we were turning I looked out the passenger window and watched as the hubcap separated from the wheel and continued down the road. I have plenty more stories about merging onto the highway, failing priests and nuns. The nuns were always terrible, motorcycle tests and just plain stupidity. And no, Asians weren't the worst drivers. That honor goes to people 50 plus getting their license for the first time. Almost guaranteed fail. I was driving without a license for a while. No insurance, you know nothing. I figured it was time to legal it. I pulled the sun visor down and a bag of weed fell down. Nervously I asked the instructor if she liked to party. She did not. At my driving school, we took the test in pairs. You drove your test, but you also had to sit and observe another test and discuss what the other person did wrong. I did my driving part, and the instructor had me pull over. He then turned to the kid observing and told him he failed because he was texting the whole time, despite the fact that he drove perfectly. To be fair, if the task is to watch and you don't, the instructor has a point. First off, I'm a good driver. I was getting my French driver's permit, which, if you have ever tried, around 90% don't get it the first time. I was in heavy traffic and the person before me had failed already. I was asked to drive into a parking and park the car. Everything was going fine until a car pulled in the other entrance to the parking, and like a freaking American I had already turned the car caddy corner in order to make my backing job easier. I was blocking the way and the other car had the right of way, so I failed. I eventually saved up enough again to test again, and after driving past that same parking lot I noticed that it was a one-way parking, and I had the right of way. The other car was driving the wrong way on a one-way parking, so I failed because the inspector was a dumbest basically. 1. Had a customer run 2 stop signs and a right on red, travel on a business route 25 under the speed limit, take a left on red across a highway and end up in the oncoming lane, run another stop sign, go straight in a turn lane, and then park straddling 2 parking spots. He didn't understand why he failed. 2. Had a customer approach a 90-degree left-hand dogleg at about 20 over and skid into a ditch. I had to specifically instruct him how to operate the motor vehicle to get back to the parking lot. I got lucky. We've had people injured there. 3. Had a customer run into an employee vehicle in the parking lot. That was more of a facepalm than anything. Thankfully, most of the time folks that fail don't do anything too terribly heinous. I go the other way. Being real nervous and hoping to distract the examiner, I started chatting, asking questions and trying to initiate conversation early in the test, before we even get into the car. After the first turn he said flatly, "The best way to make it through this test is to focus on your driving." So I smiled, looked at him and answered, in other words, shut the frickin' drive. He stared forwards and didn't say a word. My smile faded away, but I kept quiet. I passed. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.